Well, welcome everyone. I'm Earl Beede, and we're going to be talking today about adapting the product owner role to be effective while your team is working from home. Now, as I said, my name is Earl Beede. I'm a senior fellow here at Construx, and I'm happy to share with you some of the things I see our clients doing, trying to get the product owner role when we're distributed, when we're not able to sit with the development team or the stakeholders. So we're going to be taking a deeper look into that over the next 45 minutes or so. This is part of an overall process that we have here at Construx in our Lunch and Learns. We actually did something kind of similar in 2009. Back in 2009, that was the dot-com bust, and a lot of technical people were out of work. And so we created a program to give free public training to those people who were trying to up their skill set. Well, we got past that point, but here we are in the middle of the coronavirus and COVID-19, and we thought, wow, a lot of people are having to work from home or a little bit shut in. So we created Spear 2020, our Lunch and Learn program, and I'm glad you could find us and join us. And our goal with the Lunch and Learn program is to allow a lot of you to start thinking about, yeah, I'm stuck at home, but there's a larger community of people out there, things I can go understand and learn and do. And so we invite you to participate and sort of start seeing, yes, there's a bigger world of software professionals out there that I can learn from and grow through here at Construct and through lots of other sources. We're going to keep this Lunch and Learn. We're committed to it at least the end of April. And at the end of April, we'll make a decision and see how we go forward. So take a moment and share this with your friends because we got a couple great ones coming up next week. Steve McConnell's going to talk about the cone of uncertainty and where that came from and where it's headed. And Jenny Stewart's going to talk about Kanban myths next week. So share those with your friend and get them all on board. A little Lunch and Learn tech before we get too far today. I'll be speaking and you'll mostly be listening, but you have a chance to submit questions at any time using the Q&A button. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, there should be a button that kind of looks like this yellow guy right here. And if you see that button looks like that, it's not yellow, it's actually kind of probably black or something like that. But click on that button, that'll bring up the Q&A dialog, and feel free to submit questions at any time. I'll answer them at the end most likely, but that's your chance to ask them. And ask them when they come up because you can pause this presentation any time. If you need to step out and do something or have a conversation, just hit the pause button and then pick it up as you go on. And if you have submitted your question before, say, 12:30 Pacific time, I'll be happy to answer that as I wrap up. And you can still hear the answer even though you've come in much later. Do be warned though, if you're using the web browser, the spacebar can also pause the web interface if that has focus right now. And so if it's paused and you're not sure why, check the spacebar or the pause button. And because you can pause it, you can also go back and play any part of the presentation you like. So if I said something that you found really interesting and you want to hear it again, just pause it, scoot it back, play it again. You'll be a little behind the live part of me, but you'll still get everything. So that's the tool tech that we have currently going on right now. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, here's the courses for our lunch, if you will. I'm going to start out with some product owner basics to make sure that we're on the same page because there's no use trying to say how we can use technology and other tools to help with distributed teams unless we understand what the product owner is really trying to do. And so I'm going to try to set that stage up very clearly right off the bat there. And then we'll look at the tools that help the PO. We'll look at traditional tools and we'll see how we can augment those with additional tools, say electronic meeting spaces, that kind of stuff. And then we'll look at the main things that product owners have to do with backlog creation, refinement, planning, execution, and review, all when we're distributed. And in this case, like me here, working from home, right? And then we'll digest it all. We'll take a look and I'll give you a digest, a list of key points that we went over. So that's where I think we're going to be going with this. So let's just start out here with the product owner basics. What is the job that we need to help the distributed team the product owner needs to do? Well, to set that up, I think you have to start seeing what the product owner starts working with is this idea of a series of interactions or functions, if you will. What we got here is our development team is building us as product owners we got to see the development team building us what we should think of as a big box of black magic, right? A big box of magic that however it does it, we don't care. That's what the dev team does. What we care about are these interactions on the outside. Things like this person over here, they have some interactions. This one over here has some interactions. There's all these interactions out the outside. And these could be different. They may be people interactions, or they may be interactions of other parts of the system or components that you work with. So these are the things that we need to focus on initially. So as a PO, we're worried about these interactions. That's our main deal. And there may be things like send list. You need to go list from this thing, or this machine needs status, right? Whatever these interactions are, we need to be focused on that. So the PO basically is looking at those interactions and saying, how in my mind, right here, big thought bubble, how in my mind do I truly understand that interaction? And not only understand the interaction, but what's going on around that interaction. Who's involved? What do they know? What do they like? Are there different kinds of roles during the interaction that have different kinds of skill levels and understanding? So when I'm doing backlog creation, really what I'm first trying to understand is what are those interactions? And I need to grasp them all fully in my head and understand everything I can possibly about them. One of the things that, as I did this job for many years, long before they called it a PO in some ways, is that in a sense, this person as a PO needs to understand that interaction as well, or sometimes even better than the people who actually execute it, because they're going to look at it from multiple different angles. So in backlog creation, the first step the PO has to do is to say, do I understand the interaction? Not what's inside the big box of magic. The big box of magic is magic, but I have to understand the interaction really well. And because there are a lot of interactions over here, a lot of the things I have to do, I'm going to capture those in little remind me notes. These are sort of like memory joggers, right? I even want to write that down here because I think it's a memory jogger, right? I have this little thing, user stories, other forms of PBIs or product backlog items. These are things that remind me of this big conversation thing up here, all this stuff up here that I'm thinking. I have a memory jogger to help me remind me of it. It doesn't contain everything I thought of because that's just a vast amount of knowledge, but it has enough to help me remember what's going on there, right? So that's my memory jogger. And then I'm going to stick that in the product backlog. In my product backlog, I have lots of product backlog items, all these different memory joggers. And this is really handy because now I can see a place where I have them, I can sort them, I can work on them. So my product backlog, PBIs, that's where I stick them. So that's what I do in backlog creation. I understand those interactions, I create memory joggers, and I place those memory joggers into a backlog where I can sort them, prioritize them, and the dev team can roughly size them. So now we got backlog creation down. And then we go into backlog refinement. This is something I spent a bunch of time on earlier this week. And if you go into our on-demand environment, you can see how user stories help distributed teams, where I talked about backlog or user story levels. And you can see I have berry level, user path level, step level, sub-step level over here. These are levels I describe more fully in that other course. But the idea is that the product owner really gets to understand, so we sort of draw a line here. The product owner understands the berry and value path. That's where they're the experts are. And down below, the dev teams become sort of the experts or leaders on those levels. So in backlog refinement, we have to take it from what the PO just saw, because remember, the PO was just looking at this interaction, right? In backlog creation, this interaction. And up here are those interaction levels. This is what describes that interaction. And then we start breaking it down to bits of that interaction. As we break it down to bits, the dev team is looking at it, trying to understand it, and just thinking of design ideas, how they're going to try to solve it, what they're going to put in their big box of magic to solve that interaction so they can get what they want out of that. And that's what we see here often as we sort of define the steps. We'll start seeing technology creep in there. And so the PO works with the dev team. Well, I shouldn't have drawn the line here, so I'm going to use my little eraser here. Take out a little bit of that line, right? Because they're going to work together. And as they work together, they'll pull that apart and make lots of stories that work within the dev team's increment, whether they're still physically together or we have to break it down further, as I argued on Tuesday, into smaller units. The third thing that the product owners do is they say, as we go to actually work on them, I have to take an item off my backlog, right? One of my memory joggers, and it has to jog my memory over here, right? It has to jog that memory. I have to bring up all that context, all those bits that were around that memory jogger. The memory jogger itself is insufficient. I need it to jog my memory. Then I see all this content, and then I start having this conversation with the dev team that explains all that stuff, all that context, nuance, what's happening before, what's happening after, all these different things, including all the acceptance criteria. And then I share that with the dev team in a conversation. That's what the PO does. We don't just hand the memory jogger to the dev team. We use that to jog our brains, and we share all that other stuff. So that's the third thing the PO has to do. And then finally, the fourth thing the PA do, which isn't really as hard to do these days, but it's interesting as we look at more distributed now, is to say, I facilitate the sprint review. And as I facilitate or actually become the focus of the sprint review, one of the things I really have to do is help explain to the stakeholder community, that's these people out here, the stakeholder community saying, hey, the dev team working on this has seen lots of possibilities, lots of things that they could do to help enhance this. And here's some ideas that they have that you might really like, right? Because by doing this, they help the stakeholder community start saying, we could possibly do this. That might be more valuable than the things that we were thinking of, because that actually fits our needs better. And because the dev teams are deep in the tool, they can come up with new ideas that say, this might be really cheap for you to get some real value out pretty quickly. So that's the last thing the product owner has to do. So the four things, they have to do backlog creation, backlog refinement, do sprint planning and execution, and the sprint review. So what tools do we have to help the product owner? Well, when we look at the original Agile set of tools here, they're kind of like this, right? I mean, when they really started, they were just like, hey, give me some 3x5 cards, some sticky notes, a big old whiteboard to stick things on. But mostly their main tool here was the human, right? The human with their brain, their big, smart, fully encompassing brain, and their ability to communicate to other people, right? To have these conversations. And using the 3x5 cards and the sticky notes and the whiteboard just as a way to jog the memories and to sort of help communicate quickly what our status was. Now, this works really, really well with a color-coded team, right? If you're all standing together around that whiteboard, this works pretty darn well, and it's sort of the gold standard of how much content. But unfortunately, when we're distributed, that's not going to cut it. I mean, people have tried to put a camera on the whiteboard and put speakerphones, but man, that doesn't work very well very long. So what have we got to help the people out with distributed tools? Well, we've got a whole bunch of them out there right now that we can possibly use. Let's take a look at a few of these things right now. The first one, things like Discord or wikis or different kinds of linked document or linked text capture, right? Wikis and Notion, Discord all have these conversations in threads and stuff like that, very much like Teams and Slack. Teams and Slack sort of a step down from that a little bit. Discord could have more of these more clearly threaded, though Slack is trying to bring some of that kind of stuff in as well. Slack and Teams are more of a back and forth conversation. You can get them to work a little bit better that way, but wikis with their ability to links, more graphics put in there, Notion that way too, can be a lot more dynamic. And then we got the big document SharePoints, Confluence, SharePoint, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, all these places where we can stick stuff. And the trick here is I want you to think about with the stick stuff is not just, I mean, when we think about these things, we often might think of docx, right? Word documents or something like that. But what I want you to think about is not docx, but any kind of binary file, right? Because binary files look at it. So we got images and movies and stuff we can stick up there. So let's not limit ourselves to the docx kind of thing. We got the apps that are been developed primarily to support Agile, Jira, Azure DevOps, and the like, right? All those out there really are out there to help us store user stories, move them through. And don't forget voice over IP. One of the biggest change I've seen over the last 10 years is the movement toward voice over IP over traditional POTS lines. Now it's no problem to call anyone anywhere for any reason on the planet. It's just as the same cost as doing everything else. We got the virtual meeting spaces like Zoom, WebEx, HPE's My Room, GoToMeeting, Google Meet, all those other ones. And that's a great ad too. We can get the visual, the human beings there, and it's way better than it was in the 90s. Trust me, I was there trying to use them. These mostly work today, and especially as we work from home right now with the coronavirus, it's been a lot better than we had. One area that I don't think a lot of people are taking a little advantage of is this last one down here. All the drawing tablets, iPads, and surfaces we can use. This is one of the big ads I think that a lot of people aren't taking advantage of, is the ability to draw naturally. Not on those whiteboards like in Teams or in Slack or even Zoom. Those are actually awful to draw on. But if you can get yourself a tablet, or more importantly, like an iPad or a Surface, which you can then mirror and share that to the overall thing, that works really, really slick. In fact, I'm running this entire thing off of the Surface, right? And so, on other things here, the other thing we could use is as I should put up on this list here, and I've been examining this thing. There's like Jamboard, Miro, other things like that. So on Mural, other cool tools like that that you can use to actually have a shared whiteboard experience, right? And you can see it. So Jamboard has good sticky notes. Miro has good Mural. I think I hear has good sticky notes as well, where you can share sticky notes back and forth. Jamboard sticky notes are not that great, but it's cheap because it's free for a lot of things. But you can do sticky notes up there too. But we'll show those adding into other things right here. So those are our major distributed tools. However, when most people think Agile help tools, they're only usually thinking about the Jira Azure DevOps. They're the big 800-pound gorillas in the room. And so what do these tools do for you? Well, for the Jira Azure DevOps and the like, what they tend to do for you is a few things. One, over here on the user stories or PBIs, they help us list, prioritize. Maybe we can record information about them, like the user story description, the acceptance criteria, the size, that kind of stuff. And often there's a good at keeping status, right? There's usually a status button in there. So they do okay there. The other place they do okay over here is for the dev team, right? Because if they create tasks and they can have statuses on the task and notes on the task, it does pretty well there as well. Where it doesn't do very well is this, how do I get all that thinking stuff? Jira, Azure DevOps really don't help that, as well as help capture all that context, all that other kind of stuff. And they really don't help these conversations that well, right? They all they have are these memory joggers, right? They don't have the conversation. They don't have all that context. And there isn't an obvious place to put them. And if you think it from the design side too, all their designs, right? We have tasks, but what about higher level designs? Things that, strategies that we have that we want to capture, or design things that are required by the consumer. There's not a lot of that in here too. So Azure DevOps are really missing some key things. They're missing all that context of the user story, not just the story itself. We got that in there, but all the context around that is supposed to be shared as part of that conversation. And how often, because we've done that refinement, breaking it down into smaller bits, that larger value path, the thing that actually delivers value, kind of gets lost. We see the little leaf, but not the entire tree. And of course, I mentioned the conversation, and it's not just the PO speaking, but all the questions and the challenging and making sure that this is up and up. So much it turns into a one-way stream rather than a back and forth conversation. And I also mentioned the design decisions, all the ways we want to think about doing design and actually executing design. That tends to be missing, especially at the high level and the mid level. The low level tasks, I think it's okay at, but the high level, mid level, we seem to be missing those. So let's go through those 4 areas I talked about and see how we can supplement these Agile tools. I'm going to assume that you already have these things, right? That you already have a Jira or an Azure DevOps or a version 1 or something like that. How can we supplement that one to deal with the 4 areas? So let's take a look at that. So let's look at first at backlog creation when distributed. How can I supplement the Jira, supplement the Azure DevOps and such with this kind of stuff? Remember, our goal here and where we saw our overall need was to understand those interactions and get them in here. And our Azure DevOps tools say, you know what, I do pretty well at this part. I can capture this thing for you, and I can capture this part of you. So Azure DevOps got those two things. So we're going to be focusing more over here. How do I get this part done? Now, I'm also going to assume that you as a PO, if you're listening, have a pretty good handle on how to actually interact as a product owner, doing the kind of things like state models and domain diagrams and context models and having workflows and activity models, all that kind of stuff. I'm assuming you know how to do that, but how do we augment that conversation when distributed? So here's what I think is some ideas I've seen out there from the wild. Right? So given our goal of understanding the interaction and capturing value paths being one way to actually get value out of the black box of magic. If I give you this, you will give me this back. End of story. No ifs, ands, no multiple different ways, just one way, right? So value paths are sort of one way to get value, right? What other ideas do we have? Well, obviously, I'm going to mention them here. I'm not going to mention them again. Our video meetings, right? The Zooms, the Teams, the WebExes, the GoToMeetings, the Hangouts, all that kind of stuff. Video meetings are good, but I'm going to give you a couple tips here that really seem to help us out. One, keep those meetings short. Don't go for full day or half day things. You can pull that off when you're humans because you can get up and you can walk around and you can stretch your legs. It's really much harder trying to do that online with the video things. I much rather have 2 one-hour meetings in the same day, a couple of hours apart, than try to have a 1-2 hour all hands meeting or all go meeting, because it's just too hard to sit in front of the screen and pay attention that way. You're going to sacrifice some speed here. There's no doubt about that. And one of the trade-offs we're constantly going to be looking at is sacrificing some speed for some clarity and completeness and getting it right. And so here's where you're going to may have to make that trade-off. But you can just do a couple stacked meetings. That works okay in the same day, as long as they're not back-to-back, giving people to do some other things. And when I'm doing that real-time meeting, because, you know, turns out being synchronous, being at the same time, does have many advantages over being asynchronous, that we shift times between each other. So if we can be synchronous, I think that's great. But what I want to focus on when I am being synchronous is that stakeholder desk sharing. Stakeholder, you show me your world. Show me what you're doing. If you can, pull out your pocket phone and turn the camera and show me your world, right? What's going on there? What's going around this? So I can understand that. And I think the camera here, and that's the second one here, is a great add to this. Give me some screenshots. Give me some images of what you're doing and what's going on around you. Maybe we can turn that into a storyboard, what we can then share with the rest of the people. So I want not just what's going on here, but I want some sort of narrative about that value path. And I want to do this a value path at a time. It turns out doing things as a value path gives me one interaction, then I'll talk about another interaction, then I'll talk about another interaction, or a variation on a previous interaction. By doing that, I get complete ideas, and this focuses and gets us through very short meetings very quickly, right? Rather than trying to solve all the problems all at once. And like some people mentioned, the digital whiteboard is a great tool. And what I like that tool is because if I use that tool, what I can do is I can have multiple people on here, hopefully in real time if possible. If not, we'll have to do it over stage, and start saying, here's all my little steps, right? And different people are writing in different color little post-it notes, and I can start arranging them and shifting them around, right? So we can move like this one up here and show where it works in the flow of this particular one. And then we can rearrange them to a different value path at a different time. And if we use something like a Jamboard or something like that for this particular kind of work, that gives us a lot of flexibility in the future to come back to it and slightly rearrange it or add one more step to make a whole new value path, right? Because we left it off on the first one because it wasn't necessary in this one, but the next one, we add it to the flow somewhere and create a new value path. And this allows a lot of people to be moving around. And when you get people actually clicking on things and dragging around, the interaction rate and the engagement really goes up. So that's a really good tip here. So that's a good one as well. All right. So if you have questions in QA, remember, put those QA as we go along so we can ask them going forward. Backlog, how about doing during refinement, right? How do we deal with that? Well, there's a remind ourselves what we're talking about here. This is the taking the levels down here, right? Because up here is the PO level. This is where you're writing about the interaction and acceptance criteria of that interaction and being the memory jogger, so you can have that conversation between you and the development team down here as you try to break this apart. So how can we possibly break the apart? This is the one I think that needs some of the deepest conversation going on. For the stakeholder backlog creation, yeah, that's deep conversation, but I'm going to have that a little bit at a time. Here, I need to engage more fully with the team because this is how the team knows what to build. Now, in real life, we would do this in person, but how can we possibly do this as we get distributed? So my tool, my Agile tool, is going to help me a little bit here. It's going to capture the output of this conversation in terms of the memory joggers for the team and for myself. But it's not going to capture the conversation very well. That's why I have this sort of, well, check-ish, right? It's going to capture the output, the memory joggers, but not much else. So how are we going to supplement this one? So my goal here in these conversations is to introduce stories, right? So I'm going to start saying that context. So the story is not, when I say introduce, not to say here's the physical card or here's the entry in Jira or Azure DevOps, but to say here is that context, all that stuff that's in that thought bubble. That's what it means to introduce it. And then when we look at it and say, does this fit in your sprint? And it doesn't, we have to figure a way to break it apart. So I help them understand the logical flow, and they'll show how technology can help make that go forward. And then as they're doing that, they're going to be generating design ideas, and they'll be wanting someplace to capture that. Now, I'm going to leave that mostly to the dev team, but I'm really here focused on how do we hold that conversation. So a couple ideas I've seen out there that work well. I think video is still an excellent tool here. I think video works really well. And what's really cool about video now with Teams and Zoom and all the others, I can record it. So I don't have to have necessarily the conversation with the entire team. If I can, I will, but I can record it. And I can do it a couple different ways. I might say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and just do my introduction as a solo recording that people can watch on their own time. So when we get together in a small window of overlap, perhaps, that we could just focus on decomposition, not me introducing it, because they can watch that video ahead of time. So I can record that video into my favorite little tool like Teams or Google Hangout, and then share that with the rest of the group. So that's one way of doing it. We can also use the Slack, the Teams, that kind of thing for our threaded chat, or more if you have a better one like Discord or the others. And we like to use those primarily because I need to check on something because I think I got a chat message from my thing. Nope. Okay. We got to use those things because, oh, chat, right. One of the things we want to do with the chat is to say, hey, what I want to do is sort of say, can we have focused conversations? And what I'm going to do there is the tip is create a new channel for every value path. Remember that value path is that one way. Okay. One way to get through the process. And if you created that chat per one way, then everyone on the team could go back and have that conversation about that one way. Not doing 20 different things at once, but focus one channel per value path. And once you're done with that channel, you can either delete the channel if you want to, or just hide it. Most tools allow you to hide it so you don't have to see it again. And you've got a record of that conversation going forward so that future people can come back and say, oh, what was going on there? They can find it and talk about that path. Another thing you can do is a narrated slideshow. The slideshow is using a tool like PowerPoint or Google Slides, where we record an audio that goes along with the slides itself. And what I'm talking about here is doing something like this, where I have, this is PowerPoint, and I have this little button here that says record slideshow. And what I want to do is I want to record a show that gives me that context, that picture. And these are the kinds of things I want to record in that slideshow. I want to talk about the stakeholder, the people who are actually trying to get value, right? They're the ones that want the value out of this thing. Who are they? What do we know about them? Their education, skills, ability, all this kind of stuff. Tell me about them, and if there's different segments of them, let me understand them and which one's more important than others to the business. So as I make decisions as the dev team, I know exactly who I'm trying to make happy. But also tell me information about the environment. Things like, where are they doing this work? The time of day they're doing it. Is it early in the day, late in their day? How noisy, how quiet it is? How much pressure is on them for other activities? Is there time pressure, and is there other task pressure? Are they trying to multitask when they do this, right? So tell me what's going on, not just who they are, what's going on around them. So as I make other decisions, I make sure it works well with them. And then for this particular interaction, tell me if they have to have like any special understanding or skills. How often do they do this? Are they going to become experts pretty quickly, or is this something they only do once in a while? What's happening just before this, the pre-activities? What's happening just after this, the post-activities? These are things I can record into a slideshow and show images that I took with my camera when I was doing that backlog creation, right? So I could just keep that kind of narrative going, and then I could put this up into the SharePoint, the Confluence, and all those other places for people to then write down and understand at their own time. So a really good tip there. And then the third thing we do is our online spreadsheets. This could be very handy for things like story mapping, because what I can do in that kind of thing is I can say, okay, here is my logical model of my story map. I'm not going to try to put all the stickies up there because we're distributed. The stickies won't help a lot here. I could use a sticky-like tool like a jump board, but it's really hard to write in those kind of things. I'd have to go to a more like tool like Mural or Miro, where it allows me to really sort of drive that in a little bit better, have better sticky notes. But a simple one is a shared spreadsheet. Here we could do an online version of Excel, or this is a Google spreadsheet thingy. I forget what they call that one, cells or something, I don't know. But here you can just see I've got a logic set, and then everyone can start typing different ways of trying to meet those steps, the different things that they think go underneath there. And we can brainstorm this rather rapidly, or we can do it asynchronously if needed, where people come in at different times and adding things to it over a day or two, right? So another great tool here is the spreadsheet. So those are my ideas that I've seen out there that can help the refinement conversations when you're distributed. But the trick here is to make sure that you realize the goal here, that we introduce all that context and then work on decomposing. And then we can use things like video meetings and chat to help really understand and keep that conversation going. And if you have QA on this, go ahead and stick it up when you have time. How about sprint planning execution? Well, what's happening here is, remember, we're taking our little memory jogger off our queue, and then we're re-invoking that conversation again, right? We're saying, okay, remember, this is that whole context. And this time, because if we're doing refinement really well, this is more of a reminder conversation than it is a brand new conversation. Now, sometimes if we've got something right out of sprint review that we have to pull in here, it might be a brand new conversation. But generally, this is a reminder conversation because we've already looked at this thing hopefully a few times in backlog refinement. This should not be our first time ever seeing this thing as a PO and dev team combination, right? So how are we going to augment this one? So the goal, oh, I'm sorry, I got to admit, yeah. So our Agile tools really help me out in the product backlog, and my Agile tools are helping me with the memory jogger, but what they don't help me with is the conversation. So how are we going to augment that conversation? Well, the other thing they help me with too is the task. So in the execution, when they're running it, we can get the task down there. So I had to put a check mark down here by the tasks as well. So what are we going to actually do here? Well, we need to refresh and contextualize stories. Remember, the key word here is refresh typically most of the time, right? We don't have to do this from the beginning. And as a PO, I want to sanity check the designs. As they're coming up with solutions, I got to think about that entire interaction that I've been studying and make sure that solution is actually going to solve the right problem. So I'm watching them as they're doing their sprint planning and doing all the detailed design to make sure those actually are good. And as they're building it, confirm that they're actually meeting the acceptance criteria. That's what I'm looking for here. So some ideas I've seen out in the wild I think work pretty well. First of all, if you're doing a good job in refinement, there's a lot of reused material right there, right? We've got a lot of that stuff to refresh and contextualize that people can look at and review prior to going into the meeting. That's a really big win there. So if you're doing this part really well, more power to you. That's really the good thing. Another thing, so I think that covers a lot of the freshening it up kind of thing. When we get into sprint planning and actually executing the work, here's where video blogs coming. If we cannot be symmetrical, i.e. that I can't have sort of you all on the same time with the Zooms and the WebExes and stuff like that, I still want to come in and say, maybe we can use some video blogs and voice memos. The idea is this. The idea of a video blog is to say, hey, let's take out, someone bring out their camera, and we're going to show you doing what we're doing. Here's our design idea for this story. Send it off as a video blog as opposed to just a bunch of tasks in Jira. Have that conversation. Have someone sort of draw up and film someone drawing on a whiteboard how they're going to solve it. So me as the PO can go, is that going to work for my client, right? If I can't get the video, voice memos is the next best thing. Tell me about it. I don't want to try to have to read it in the paper. Tell me why you think this is solving it. So dev team, give me a voice memo. I'll give you a voice memo back. And the reason I like voice memos is because it gives me nuance. It gives me energy. It helps me hear the confidence in their voice, not just what they've written down. And it lets me know where they are solid and where they're a little bit iffy, because you can hear that in their voice as they're presenting it. Another place we can go, if we really want to back off just the written stuff, this is where I think wiki pages really start to sing out a little bit here. I think wiki pages, and this could be in a wiki page within Teams or within Google, that allows me to work it. Because what it allows me to do is it allows me to have a conversation that we can have story by story within the sprint. From, hey, show me the design here, and they can have links to design, right? Because I can have the link to a design page here, or a link to that video. If you did a video blog, I could put it in the wiki and have a link to it so you can get to it and watch it again. And as we go through and they're building it, they can ask questions and I can respond to it here in the wiki. And then we have it about each individual story. So we have that very clear conversation going forward, right? So I like that a lot. So use the wiki, have the link to the voice memos, have a link to the video blogs, and we're good to go. And finally, sprint review, the fourth area that we were looking at. What can we do to sort of up the game here? And remind ourselves, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to have the conversation between the dev team and the stakeholders saying, here's the things that we saw going on that were really good, right? That might you say, you know what? You could do this, and that might give you a lot of value. And so here's an idea. So in a sense, it's sharing ideas from here to here, mediated to the PO, who's been hopefully understanding that context well enough to say, let me present this to you in a reasonable way. So what's our goal here in the review conversations? Our primary goal is to demonstrate to all the stakeholders what they have, and then what they possibly could do based upon what we've learned working in the depths of this tool, right? That's what the dev team's trying to do. So our conversation ideas here. If we did video blogs, I think that's a really good idea. I think resharing those can be really, really handy. You can really drive that forward. But another idea here is for the dev team to create, and with my help as a product owner, narrative storyboards. And the way they work, something like this, is that we look together and using PowerPoint or Google Slides, we draw stuff. Now here's where the tablet comes really handy, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on these storyboards. You can see in my example here, each of these slides is sort of hand-drawn really quick to say, here's the idea. You walk up to the terminal, and then you see a new dialogue about place. You click on it, all the places show up in a list. And then after you select one of those, you see a dialogue about time, you select all the times, and then we can generate this report to you about the places and times. Off you go, right? So a narrative in a storyboard. But we don't just create these pictures, we narrate it through. They tell the story of what's going on. So you have some audio on 1, some audio on 2, some audio on 3, some audio on 4, etc. And let that narration really seep through there and drive that forward. So I think this is a great tool. And this could happen, again, with that record slideshow and PowerPoint, or there's some other storyboard tools out there. Google Slides lets you record audio per slide as well. Or you can just, if you really want to do, you take your camera out again of your phone and hold up a picture, talk to it, and then hold up the next picture, talk to it, right? We don't have to be super sophisticated here because the voice itself, the conversation itself will carry so much more information than if we just send static images. So those are the idea. What do I sort of my takeaways from all this? What kind of key points do I see going on here? Well, as we digest this is what I sort of hope you walk away from this, our little brainstorming session today. One, PO conversations are way more than that physical user story card, what I've been calling in this presentation a memory jogger. The memory jogger is there to jog something else. It's supposed to help us in something else. So we have to get out of a little sense the Azure DevOps or the Jira as being the way that we do distributed work. It's there to help us. We need to add to that some other things. If we can do that in real time using the Zoom, the WebExes, that's actually usually better than asynchronous because we can have that quick dialogue, that quick back and forth. And in there, you might want to come up with what are often I call working agreements around communication or communication agreements. In these communication agreements, you talk about how you're going to use these tools to have your conversations, how you interact in those conversations. Do you have something the equivalent of a squishy ball or a hand that you can use? Is there going to be a moderator or a chair who's going to call on people to speak? So make sure everyone's heard and people raise their hand and that kind of thing. You can come up with your own working tools that way. So synchronous communication is usually better than asynchronous, but when you're distributed and you're all working from home in different time zones, then we have to go to asynchronous, and we saw there's lots of tools that can help there. But really what we want to start doing is saying, can we pull in the audio and visual part of it, right? Because we've got the written part down okay-ish. We've got Confluence and Dropbox and SharePoint and all that kind of stuff. But what about the audio and visual? Because that adds the nuance and the breadth, all that stuff that often is missing when we're just looking at written documentation, right? And it allows people to create these more cheaply. It's a lot cheaper just to get in and talk for 20 minutes in front of a video, and people can scrub back and forth as things. And if you here's a great tip too. If you're doing video and there's certain parts that are important, do a little scrub yourself and say, hey, at the 3-minute mark, here's where I talk about. At the 7-minute mark, here's where I talk about. That's a really great add to people. I had one group that was doing this, and they said that was one of the more important things that we learned is putting those little, hey, cheat sheets at these different points. Jump to the video and you get that stuff. You see all the good YouTubers doing that way today. And finally, this is a collection of things, right? It's always better if you can physically be together. Let's be honest, right? None of this is a substitute of standing around together around that whiteboard with our sticky notes and our 3x5 cards and allowing our human brains to do the work. But there's lots of other tools to choose from that in addition to the Azure and DevOps. What the deal is here is you got to find the right set that works for your culture and your organization. What are you willing to pay for? What do you want to try to get for free? And especially as you're doing right now, start with the Google Hangouts and stuff. It's really inexpensive to play with it. Get out there and see if any of this is going to work for you. And don't forget the audio and visual, because that's what's really, I think, brings the depth to all of this. So those are my ideas for having helped the PO have that conversation. So let's take a look at the Q&A over here and see what we got going for you. First question I have here is about voice memos. What technology? Well, the technology I often use initially for voice memos is my phone, right? I can just put a Holdy voice memo in here and it creates a memo. Then I can save that as an MP4 and I can send that, put that up in my SharePoint, my Confluence. Other tools you can use PowerPoint or slides. Both of those record audios as well. You just do it for one slide, right? You could say, hey, and there's put your topic on the one slide, record your audio for the one slide, and put that up into your Confluence or your SharePoint or wherever you're storing your stuff. So lots of choices there. Simplest one is use your phone. A little more complex, you can use PowerPoint or slides. Other than that, I think I was playing on my Mac here. It has a voice memo function built into it. Let's save as MP4. If you can, there's VLC, I think it is, which is the multiple format player. It's free. You can get that. So no matter what they record in, you can play the audio for free. Those are the tools. So hopefully that answers the voice memos. What kind of tech for those? So the next question is, in your experience, how much does working in a distributed manner, especially with a team across time zones, impact the amount of work that can be successfully completed? Yeah, this is what I was talking about. So the question here is really about, if we distribute ourselves, does it change productivity? And the answer is, yeah, it does, right? You will slow down. That's just a factor of life. And that's the trade-off that the business has to take into account. Do I want certain skills? Now, it could be I could fire that person remotely and then have everyone work locally, but no one knows how to do the work locally. And now we're struggling and taking more time than if I took the slow down approach of working more distributedly. Now, I can mitigate some of that distributive work, slow down, by creating centers. And I've put it in the queue to put in our on-demand, a scaled agile. One of the ways to do it is say, let's create a center where most of the work that has to happen is still in one place. Whereas a common situation I see today is the PO is in one city and the entire team's in another city. So when I have the PO in one city and the entire team in another city, one of the things I can do to get back to, let's bring up an older picture here, this picture here. One thing I do is I can get really good at describing this with my videos, my narrative boards and all that kind of stuff, because that'll allow the team to do a lot of work down here without a lot of interaction with the PO. And I went through this in my earlier talk on Tuesday, how that can really work really, really well. And so that's in our on-demand environment, and you can look up hopefully that and see how that works. But the idea is if you can create centers, that can help speed things a little bit. But if you're all working from home right now, right, I think you're just going to have to accept the fact that unless you're in the same time zone and you're over multiple time zones, things are going to go a bit slower. That doesn't mean they have to stop. That means you're going to have some built-in delay. You can alleviate a lot of the day by doing things like the videos, because they capture so much content, you'll have less questions coming back. Okay? So hopefully that answers that question. Another question here, is there ability to comment on these audio captures, or would people have to write them down? So what I like to do on these audio captures, yeah, a lot of the tools, if I just give you a voice memo, it goes in one way. But if I embed that voice memo in a Slack Teams, right, I link to that in the Teams conversation, then they can use that channel conversation, Teams or Slack, to make the comments. So the idea is not just send the file, but embed that in one of your Slack tools. Use a combination here. So again, the idea is I have Slack, I have a video memo, I open up the channel or create a new channel and say, here is my context for this story, and I put it in that Slack conversation as a link, or in a wiki as a link, and then we have the conversation in that same place. So everyone has all the stuff together. That's a really, really good to go. All right. So that is all the questions that I had queued up for me at the end here. If you have additional things, you can go to Construx Lunch, or you can contact me at earlb.construx.com, or all at Construx at hello.construx.com. We'd be happy to hear you and help you individually work out how to work best with a distributed team. So join us again next week at Construx.com Lunch. Remember, next week we have two great ones coming up. We have Cone of Uncertainty on Tuesday with Steve McConnell, and Jenny Stewart, our VP of Consulting, is going to have Kanban myths and misconceptions. You'll want to tune in for that. Thank you very much.